Hello, and thank you for watching the story of the 4 pillars of advanced threat protection. Now, we try and define advanced threats as things that are undefined. So anything that a virus system or an IDS or an IPS could detect are outside of this scope. These are the things that companies are most concerned about and have the least understanding of. And it creates a bit of a puzzle for most of these companies because they're constantly trying to solve for 2 very different perspectives. The first perspective: how does a company grow new business and define what they want to be as they evolve and grow into the new generation of capabilities and technologies and services that may be required? How do they create competitive differentiation amongst the field of other vendors trying to build the same things and go after the same targets? How do they grow their revenue and make more money? And how do they meet their business objectives? Now, that's one half of the equation. The other half is more of an internal struggle, and that is, how do they deal with the management complexity of all of these different IT systems and information systems that are increasingly becoming the propeller that drives all the businesses? How do they weed through all of the information that exists and find that needle in the haystack that will help them advance their business and find threats against what is going to drive the business forward? How do they figure out what to focus on so that when they do look at all of this information coming into IT and to security, they understand what's relevant and what isn't? And finally, how to create the right balance of security so that they haven't gone so completely overboard with investment and infrastructure that they've created a massive amount of complexity, but they have created a reasonable level of assurance that their environment is safe from most threats. So these 2 priorities, growing new business and meeting goals, as well as dealing with the aggravation and frustration and finding the needle in the haystack, they don't have to be 2 separate priorities. There is a way to get those 2 halves to come together. And really, it is all about a simple equation. Now, I've talked about this equation many times if you've seen my other short stories, but the general idea is that you can't adjust the number of threats out there, but you can mitigate your vulnerabilities, and it's the threat times the vulnerabilities that equal the brand damage. So the more vulnerabilities you have, the higher potential for brand damage exists. So there are 4 ways in which we can help you deal with these vulnerabilities. Now, I like to count down. So I'm going in order from inside out. And the first one, which is 4th on the list, is your crown jewels. Now, the crown jewels are a very, very common topic. Everybody talks about them, but what we need to do is really deeply classify exactly what they are and how to protect them. But you can't protect something if you don't know what it is and where it is. So let's talk about that first. Now, if we look at a measure of the amount of damage a piece of information can cause your business and how easy it is to understand what the financial impact of that will be, we can look at 2 examples of outliers. Audit delays is minor damage and easy to quantify. It is missing a federal filing by a couple of weeks, or a tax return, or being out of compliance by a couple of check marks. You know exactly what that is, how much it will cost to fix, how many fines you have to pay, and you can even budget for that on an annual basis. And as a matter of fact, most companies do. But on the other end of that spectrum, you have things like a chief executive turning bad. And in that model, the damage is unquantifiable. You just don't know the extent of the financial impact, and you know that the damage will be fairly critical because that chief executive has all of the company information. So if we exclude those 2 things, we're left with 3 things in the middle. Compliance data, which a lot of people would argue is their crown jewels, but I would say it isn't. And the reason why is because you can quantify the financial impact of having compliance information stolen, and the damage is relatively minor. It may cause a bit of a mess and some internal strife, but for the most part, you can move forward almost unhindered. The second thing we hear a lot is personally identifiable information, and although that is critical, and it can create some pretty massive brand exposure. How many companies in the past 5 or even 10 years have gone out of business because PII breaches have occurred? And the answer is none. And then finally, this is what you need to focus on. Ask yourself what your wrecking balls are. What types of information could get out that are so absolutely damaging to your business that if they got out, you would have to restructure your business or close the doors? That's your key crown jewels. And so you have to put a very tight filter on it, because every company has tons and tons of compliance and PII related data out in the ether. It's everywhere. And trying to protect all of that when you know it's not going to be truly business impacting is going to be a waste of time and effort. Now, it's important to protect it, and you have to do that, but you have to do it through the compliance guidelines that are set out, through whatever frameworks and compliance you've adopted. But the wrecking balls are what you have to focus on your protection around first and foremost. So that's the first topic: data classification and understanding what those crown jewels are and finding those wrecking balls. Now let's look at the next one. Now, the cloud is a very scary topic, and when people hear cloud, they get the shivers, and it's very mean and menacing looking. And here's why. In a traditional enterprise security environment, most people could argue that the information security environment is relatively secured, because all of the information and the endpoints and the people go to a physical office, and that office allows you to create boundaries between your information and the outside world, so it seems relatively safe. When you move to the cloud, you have to take that information and put it on mobile devices and remote data centers across the internet, and you create exposure. So how do we get the perception that the cloud can be a very nice, friendly place to be? And the answer is, you have to look at where the vulnerabilities are, mainly the fact that you now have information traversing the internet and existing in some other data center, and you have people accessing it from outside of your office, and you have to protect all of those systems equally. And you have to overlay all of the areas where your information lives and is accessed by centralized analytics and governance and access management. And when you do this, you no longer can think about your enterprise as your physical offices, but your enterprise is everywhere on the internet that your information flows. And you have to look at your protection and your security architecture as going everywhere your information goes. So don't differentiate in your mind or on paper cloud security and enterprise security, because they're one and the same. And if you can adopt that philosophy and you can implement capabilities that will make that a reality, then you will create the most secure environment that you can for your information and be a little bit less afraid of the cloud as this ominous thing that's looming over your head and ready to hit you with lightning. So that's the second topic. Now let's talk about the second to last, and one of the ones that are probably scariest to most people: the concept of insider threat. And insiders are scary, and they're scary because you've given them credentials, you've given them permission to access your environment and your networks, and they probably know exactly what's inside your top secret envelopes. They know what's in the packets, and they know exactly what to take and how to take it, and potentially in a way that can't be detected. Because the first objective of an attacker, whether they're an insider or an outsider, is to not be seen. And if they're an insider and they already know what you're looking for, there's a higher probability that they can make that happen. So how do we defend against it or get visibility into it happening? In a standard flow of information, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, there's always going to be 3 points of access. There's going to be the outside world, an endpoint, and the information systems. And regardless of where the starting and stopping point is, this is typically going to be your trio of endpoints or access points. But there is one commonality across all 3 of these that can give you better insight, and that is the network. When you look at the network doesn't lie. If you have a server saying it's not communicating with anybody, but on the network you can see that it is sending data to the internet, do you believe the server that's saying I'm not talking, or do you believe the network that sees the communications flowing, the packets going out the door? You believe the network. The network is the absolute value because you can't tamper with it. You can see anything that happens. But the problem is that most enterprises don't properly correlate the network activity in real time with the server logs and the security data. And because you don't do that, you are absolutely missing something. So the simple equation is that if you have awareness of malware and threats, plus awareness of your endpoints, plus your network and your information, and you can combine all that to an analytics environment, you have a reasonably safe environment. If you exclude the network from that, you are creating gaps, and those gaps create threat. And the question that you have to ask is, am I willing to bet my reputation personally and my company's brand because I am opting not to do proper real-time correlation of all of my data, including the network, to be prepared for those types of threats? So far we've talked about 3 areas that are probably already being thought about in your environment: insider and network analytics, protecting your crown jewels, and cloud. But there's one other area that is very, very important. Up until this point, all of the information that we have been talking about is structured. Whether it's words or numbers or a combination of the two, there's a common format, and that format can be ingested and normalized and interpreted in a structured way which allows it to be correlated. But what happens if that's not how the information is being transmitted? People and documents and most information that hackers are going after is not structured. It is unstructured. It's prose. It's natural language. It's how people express emotion and feeling and desire and intent. It's how research papers are written and articles and reports are written. It's how media is produced. It's how all of the sensitive data from legal to financial to healthcare to insurance is stored. So if you're not looking at unstructured data as an indicator of threat or an indicator of compromise, once again, you're missing something. Now, we see unstructured data exploding in every single industry. Now, the problem with this is that all that unstructured data lives in this nice big brick, and most of the security telemetry devices, if not all of them, are round holes, and you can't fit a square peg into a round hole. Structured systems like security sensors and analytics don't understand unstructured data. They're not designed to. So how do you solve for this? Well, the way you justify the need to introduce these unstructured systems to help you augment your structured systems is to look at it very simply. When you only have a structured system in your environment, what you see is a set of information that will lead you to the belief that you've been invaded. That's all structured. But a hacker doesn't see it this way. A hacker operates in the unstructured realm. They are doing social engineering. They are doing investigation. They are out on social media. They are talking to their peers and their cohorts within the dark environments to try and not only find out who works in an environment, but how to become friends with them, how to steal data, and then how to sell it. If you're not looking at all of these indicators and you don't understand the information and documents in your environment, and you can't evaluate those and look at sentiment and tone of your employees and people that are talking about your company, you are quite possibly missing a very important piece of your indicators of threat. And so it is impossible to quantify just how important, especially against advanced and unknown threats, looking at the unstructured data is. So we've talked about those 4 key premises. Understand your crown jewels, don't be afraid of the cloud, look out for insiders, and look at unstructured data. And we fit all that into a 6-layer model. And the first piece of the model is all of the traditional security safeguards: information protection, network protection, endpoint, and governance and access. And all of this casts a very wide net. But you need to layer on top of that the ability to tune how your system works based on the industry you're in. And when you do that, you will see that there's tons of noise and very little signal. But you have to figure out a way to weed through all that noise. And so professional services, whether it's managed or hosted environments or consulting engagements, or just bringing in some helping hands for a while to help you further tune your system so that that noise just fades off into the background and your IT teams can focus more effort on the signal, that's what needs to happen. But even once you do that, you could still end up chasing down a lot of zero-day attacks. But the question is, how many of them are actually 0 days? And you won't know that unless you're getting curated threat data from external sources. Because it's those external sources that are going to tell your environment, oh yeah, we've seen that before. Your systems may not know what it is, there may not be a definition yet, but we have a signature for it. And we know what it is, and we know who's doing it, and potentially how to help subvert it. Don't spend time chasing down 0 days that aren't 0 days just because you're not bringing in external threat data. But we've also talked about the concept that people aren't after your security systems. They're after your intellectual property, and all that lives in big data. So you have to look everywhere for security indicators, because if people are committing fraud, they're not tampering with your security records. They're tampering with financial transaction data or healthcare information. So you have to look there and ask yourself, for every little blip on the radar, every little anomaly you're seeing out in the big data, could that be an indicator of a bigger problem from a security perspective? But the only way you're going to do that effectively is to look at the systems cognitively and look at all of the unstructured and structured information and all the social indicators and news media and current events to help you understand how you can act against potential threats, both not formed yet and fully formed and imminent, and some, unfortunately, even in progress. So this is the map. Ultimately, it is about understanding where your wrecking balls are, finding those crown jewels, mitigating risks of the cloud by implementing proper security and looking at it philosophically as one network and one security architecture, bringing in network analytics to avoid concerns around insider threat, or to help to avoid concerns around insider threat, and finally bringing in unstructured data and cognitive systems to the equation. And ultimately, if you do all four of these things, you can minimize your vulnerabilities, which will help to minimize the overall damage to your brand. And that will help you solve the puzzle. Thank you.